prime thing is you have to win.
There you go. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Hey, Mark, settle down a little bit.
Welcome back to the Just Win podcast. I'm Ted Wynn. That's Tashan Reed. Tashan is at practice. He's been at these practices. Minicamp is wrapping up for the Raiders. He's out there in the 100-degree heat. You could tell it's tank season for him. He's out there just trying to survive. And what have you seen from camp so far? How are you enjoying minicamp?
It's been hot, man. I don't know why he's doing these. They've been practicing at 10:30, which I know sounds early, but in Vegas it's already 100 degrees at 10:30 in the morning. So it's been hot out there. I saw a couple players throw up for the first time today, so it started to wear on them a little bit. Luckily, they have this like 18-wheeler trailer that they turn into an ice box that a bunch of sports teams have now. So keeping the guys hydrated and cool. But now besides the heat, I mean, it's been, I would say a pretty defensive first couple of days of minicamp. It's not to say I think the offense hasn't had its flashes. Like Geno Smith today, he had a couple nice dimes up the seam, one to Jacoby Myers and then another one to Michael Mayer for a touchdown. But it's been pretty slow for the offense otherwise. I would say the defense, especially the back seven, has been really strong. It's kind of hard to evaluate the trenches right now just as you don't have pads on. So the guys are basically taking 2 steps and then stopping, and they aren't really running the ball. So that a pass is coming. So obviously that makes it easier to defend the pass too. So defense kind of has an advantage, but I still think I've seen some good things on the back end. Toward the end of practice, Darien Holmes actually came up with a couple of interceptions, and Max Crosby, he's kind of cheating, I guess, a little bit, but he jumped the screen and picked it off for what would have been a pick six. Like, I guess it's kind of easy for the defense to tell when it's a screen after they've seen it in practice a million times. But I would say the defense has had the upper hand so far through 2 days, so that's kind of been the big takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good thing for a team that really needs some help in the secondary, really needs some players to emerge. And really, these practices are more geared towards the secondary because, like you said, you're not really scared of the run. Linebackers are dropping back as soon as the ball is snapped. You don't really have to worry about run support. So you're just kind of sitting back there and then playing pass defense. And the offense right now is trying to get his footing. Like Geno Smith learning a new offense, learning these new receivers. Good to hear that the defenders are doing what they're supposed to do. So Colton Miller is back. We know he had a little contract dispute or what could have been a contract dispute, but he's back at practice and he spoke today, and he's still not holding out. But he obviously wants a new deal.
Yeah, he talked on Tuesday. It was the first time that we heard from him since last season. When the team initially had report day in April, he wasn't there, searching of a new contract. He's going into the final year of his deal. He's only making about a little bit over $12 million in base salary this year, which is 11th amongst left tackles. And, I wouldn't knock anybody that says that he's the 11th best left tackle, but I think it's more so about going into the final year of his deal and wanting a little bit more security. He's about to turn 30 in October. And while he, had that shoulder injury a couple seasons ago, he has been a guy that's mostly been healthy throughout his career. He's only missed 7 games in 7 seasons. So he's been pretty durable. I would say an above average left tackle. Typically those guys get paid. And, I understood why he wanted a new deal. I guess kind of the more so the surprising part was how brief that holdout was. By the time the team started OTA practices, he was back. He had reported and was in the fold, going to meetings and practicing on the field. And when he spoke, he kind of just said, it's kind of the only way he knows how to do it, is to, he's never really been a guy that there was never much drama around Colton Miller. He's kind of a soft-spoken, quiet guy, team first guy. And it just really wasn't his personality to do this long, dramatic holdout. And he was essentially trying to let his play do the talking. He said he feels a lot better than he did this time last year, coming off that shoulder surgery. He really didn't practice until training camp, and he only got a handful of training camp practices in before the season started last year, which was part of why he was so rough. I think that's probably the worst we've seen him play. That's probably his first or second year. I think he got better as the season went on, but it's been night and day compared to where he was last year. He's feeling better. And, if he goes out there and has a strong season, I'm sure the Raiders will be trying their best to extend him before, he gets a chance to test free agency. So he's kind of going with the strategy of just, backing it up with his play and not doing the whole sit out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in the Raiders' best interest to pay him now. I mean, he's proven he's been a dependable left tackle. He's played through injuries. Yeah, he's not an elite left tackle, but it's very hard to upgrade over Colton Miller. Like you could, go through a bunch of failed draft picks and spend your draft capital, and you might not get close to replacing him or getting better than him. And left tackles typically age pretty well. He came into the league as a surplus athlete, so those guys typically age well. And I think if he's going to can stay at the same level for a long time. So to me, I think you should pay him now. You wait till later and it gets messy. Maybe you do get a holdout. Maybe you have to pay him more. I mean, you know what he is, and it's hard to upgrade from him. So yeah, I think you got to pay him now if you can.
Yeah, I mean, they don't seem to be in a rush to do so. I mean, it's still possible. Obviously they could do that between now and the start of the season. We still got a long way to go, about 3 more months, so we'll see. But they kind of had a similar strategy um, last year, where they didn't extend guys like Nate Hobbs and Robert Spillane and Trayvon Merrick and let them play it out and see what they did. And it bit them, pretty badly. They lost all 3 guys in free agency. So, if Colton Miller does return to form this season and they end up losing him, that'll come back to bite them in the ass in a big way. I know they drafted, the Ricky Charles Grant coming out of William & Mary, but he's more of a project. Like, there's no telling, like, when or if he's going to be ready to replace Colton Miller. So I think he'll have a ton of leverage if he goes out there and has a good season.
Yeah, I mean, with some of those guys like Merrick, like I can understand because you're trying to see if he's going to break out before you pay him. But for Colton Miller, you know what he is, and that's not going to change. I mean, like I mentioned, left tackle is typically graceful, especially hit a guy with his athletic profile. You know what he is. So I don't see why they wouldn't be talking to him or working on a deal soon. But let's talk about Jakorian Bennett. Jakorian
Actually,
Bennett was
got
that
some, but they
was
just
some
signed
breaking
Germaine
news.
Pratt. Yeah.
Oh, Germaine Pratt. There you go. One of our fan questions was about Pratt. We
Yeah.
know linebacker was a big need.
Yeah. They just signed Germaine Pratt, 1 year, $4.25 million deal with some incentives added in there. He just got cut by the Bengals. Um, he's a longtime starter there. And, we talked about, linebacker has been a position of weakness for the Raiders. That really jumped out after they lost Spillane. And also Devon Diablo, who was a starter from last season, went to the Falcons. And they kind of didn't really do that much in response. They signed Landon Roberts and Devin White to 1 year deals. Both guys who have been starters before and productive starters before, but hadn't necessarily played their best ball as of late. But I think Pratt, he's another guy, I guess you could say, he's kind of, he isn't what he was at his peak with the Bengals, but he's still a solid linebacker. And I think at this point, I would still consider him an upgrade over Devin White, most likely. And so, it's a pretty cheap 1 year deal. Take a flyer on him and kind of beef up his room a little bit.
Yeah, 29 years old. I mean, he's definitely showing signs of aging, but he's not that old. 29 years old. You can still play some good ball at 143 tackles. Not that that's the parameter for how well a linebacker plays, but he's a guy that, yeah, I mean, this linebacker room could have been one of the worst in the league. So I think Pratt definitely is a significant upgrade. And Landon Roberts and Devin White have been running with the first team, so I imagine he's going to take White's spot, and it's going to be Pratt and Landon Roberts, and White will be in the fold, but I imagine Pratt will be starting in those 4-2 looks.
Yeah, it seems like Roberts has a pretty strong hold on that Mike linebacker spot. And not that there aren't questions about him. I think he's a guy that he only played like 45% of the Steelers snaps last year. And that was really because he was, pretty much a liability again in pass coverage. And you're going to need him to step it up in a big way in that area to help solidify this room. But, I think that you get to feel a lot better about the room now that they added a guy in Pratt who, I'm not saying he's, a top 10 linebacker or something like that, but he's a solid starter and a guy that's proven and hasn't really had many injury issues. I believe he started all 17 games last season for the Bengals. So I think it's a, pretty smart signing and shouts to that fan who asked that question.
And I think Pratt was the one who actually got the game-ending interception against the Raiders in their playoff game a few years ago. against Derek Carr in that Bengals game. So, yeah, there's that. And another big position of need for the Raiders is cornerback. Jakorian Bennett spoke today after practice and revealed he had a torn labrum last season, and this is an injury that's been nagging him since college, and he finally went to get it fixed. You have an update on Bennett?
Yeah, he spoke to us on Tuesday. He said that he's had a shoulder injury since college, and I think he missed some time in college due to that shoulder injury, and it was just something that he was told he could play through, so he decided to do that and didn't want to miss time. And that carried over into the NFL. And I believe it was rookie season. I think he had some kind of shoulder flare up at some point. So it makes more sense, now that he told us what it was. And I think he went into last season. He knew he had a torn labrum and he was trying to play through it, which I think makes it kind of even more impressive. The level of play that they got out of him in those 10 games that he appeared in. But in that week 11 matchup, I think it was where he injured it. It was just at a point of no return, pretty much. The doctor told him, like, if you keep playing on this, like, it's gonna get really, really, really bad for you. And so that's when he decided to shut it down and have surgery to repair that labrum. And he's still in the process of recovering. He's mostly been working with the second team defense, I would say, throughout OTAs. I think he's looked pretty good. I think he's always been a guy that looks really good in the offseason. He's always had a good OTAs and training camp, but it's just about staying healthy, once the season rolls around and real bullets start flying. And so it's mostly been Eric Stokes and, the rookie Darien running with the ones. And I think they've both been solid. They're both cornerbacks that fit that Pete Carroll mode. Haven't necessarily made a ton of plays on the ball, but as I mentioned earlier, I mean, the defense hasn't given up much. And so, I think they've been pretty solid in coverage along with the safeties as well, with Jeremy Chan and Isaiah pull them out. And so, I think Jakorian Bennett, he can still get into the mix for a starting role as we get into training camp. Because like I said, he has looked pretty good. And so once he's 100% healthy and back rolling out there, I wouldn't be surprised if he's able to carve out a role there.
Yeah, he had some impressive moments last season. 7 passes defense, had a pretty good game against Jamar Chase. So I mean, there's some upside there. I mean, this team is so weak at corner. I'd be surprised if he's not competing for a starting spot as he gets healthier. So I mean, he said he feels better, but that doesn't mean he's completely recovered from his shoulder surgery, correct?
Yeah, I mean, like he's not, he's not like a Malcolm Kuntz right now, where Kuntz essentially, he's basically just doing individual drills and he's not doing any team drills, so he's not limited to that degree. But I do think the coaching staff and the medical staff are being a little bit cautious in terms of how many reps he is getting, just because they don't want to, cause another flare up or issue with that shoulder. And I think that's smart. I mean, at this point in the off season, you know, it doesn't make sense to risk it. And then I think also another factor is, Stokes and Porter, they're new to this system, with Patrick Graham, like they're learning it for the first time. Whereas Bennett, this is his third season that he's been operating it. So he doesn't need those reps as much, I would say. Even though Stokes is an older player, he has more experience. I think him and Porter probably need the reps more when it comes to learning Patrick Graham's system. And so I think it just makes sense to limit Bennett at this point in offseason.
Mm. And a player that's been standing out that I feel like I see his name being tweeted every day. Max Crosby single him out, but Dante Thornton, the receiver from Tennessee, 6'5", 4.3 speed. He's making plays in practice.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, he's been ahead of Jack Besh so far. I mean, he's spent more time running with the ones, just from the practices that they let us see. Like, obviously, we haven't seen every single one, but it's been him and Trey Tucker on the outside, and Jacoby Myers has been working pretty much as a slot receiver almost exclusively to this point. And so, I think it makes sense. I mean, Thornton, you mentioned it. He has that height, size, and speed combo that you want in a traditional X receiver. Question with him is just, is he a nuanced enough route runner in order to separate against NFL coverage? And he's been making splash plays. He had at least one, pretty much every practice. Today he dropped a touchdown, so he missed his moment. But Tuesday he had a nice catch in double coverage. And he's a guy that, in college he didn't really have that jump ball ability and make a bunch of contested catches as much as you would expect a guy his size. And so that's probably another area of his game, just his play strength. he's kind of while he's a tall guy, he's not like the biggest guy in terms of muscles. And so if he gets a little bigger and improves his route running, that'll be really the key to him translating that to game days. And obviously, they don't have pads on right now, so press coverage isn't what it will be, what training camp is. But nonetheless, I mean, you have to give him credit. He's been impressive so far through OTAs, and I was a little bit surprised that he's ahead of Besh at this point. Besh has largely been working with the second team offense, but I think it goes to show that Pete Carroll mantra. We keep hearing it 1,000 times. We're going to hear it a million more times. The whole compete thing, like just because a guy was drafted 2 rounds later than the other, like whoever plays the best, who's going to get the most opportunities. And so far, that's been Thornton with the rookie receivers.
Yeah. Also, I think the thinking could be like on the outside, we want our speed guys. They're gonna have Trey Tucker and Thornton running off coverage, being the deep threats. So you open up a bunch of space for Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers, who likes to work underneath. And I'm sure they're gonna have 11 personnel packages where Besh is there when they want a little bit more run blocking as well. So it's all interchangeable and just kind of working using the talents of and the skills of the guys around you. When Jack Besh is running with the second team, is he playing outside or is he playing inside more?
I think they're still trying to figure out where they want him. Like I've seen him doing both, which is, I mean, it makes sense that he pretty much was using that way at TCU as well. And so I think it's just kind of a matter of like seeing where he's best at and where they need him the most. 'Cause I think, it's kind of tricky because, I'm sure I think most people think he probably was best out of the slide in college. But I mean, when you have Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers, like, how many snaps realistically are you really going to put him in there on the slot? And so I think for him to get on the field more this season, he's going to have to, you know, become a stronger player working from the outside, not exclusively, but spending the majority of his time on the outside. And so I think that's going to be, kind of the difference whether he gets on the field or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this concerning thing is, does he have the speed to be able to separate on the outside? Because, like you said, the roll and snaps and targets on the inside is going to be pretty. It's going to be pretty tight, especially with Bowers and Myers. Next, I want to talk about the safety duo of Jeremy Chin and Isaiah Palmau. Like you said, the defense is playing well, and a big part of that has to be the safeties communicating and meshing well inside, getting everybody on the same page in the secondary.
Yeah, I mean they kind of had reset at that position. They had Marcus Epps and Trayvon Merrick were the 2 starters going into each of the last 2 seasons. That changed when Epps, went down with a torn ACL early last season. Isaiah pulled him out, pretty much got thrust in there by default. They didn't really have another option but him. And I think that, we're solid the rest of the way. Poulamau kind of had some ups and downs, particularly in man coverage. He spoke today. He said that was probably the area where he needs to improve the most. But Merrick, was really the star of the group. And I think he had easily his best season of his career. And as we mentioned earlier, because they didn't sign him to an extension early, the Carolina Panthers jumped on him and signed him to a huge $17 million a year deal that the Raiders didn't feel like they should match. And so they had to pivot and go elsewhere. And that led them to Jeremy Chin, who's, sort of this jack of all trades type of player. You can line up deep, you can line up in the box, you can play slot, you can rush off the edge, kind of one of those do everything safeties. And, that kind of frees up, pull him out to operate as a true free safety. And, it's been pretty productive for them so far in practice. They haven't given up many explosive deep plays down the field. As I mentioned, you see Chin moving around a lot, and we've talked about it. Like they don't have a great answer at nickelback, and so I think he's going to spend a lot of time in the slot and in the box this season. And when they do go to that look, Monty Johnson has come in as a third safety pretty often. And so, I think Darnell Holmes, we'll still see him out there at nickelback. I mentioned today he had a couple of interceptions, and so he's still a guy that could push for some playing time in the slot when they want to keep Chin at safety. But I think that, those two have meshed together pretty well so far. Poulamau said, Chin kind of he's a much different player than Merrick, but they're similar in that they give him that veteran presence to where it kind of lightens the load on him a little bit and lets him play more free. And so I think they have high hopes for that duo. They're probably the tallest safety duo that the league has seen in quite some time, with them both being around 6'3", 6'4". So we'll see how it carries on throughout training camp, but it's been positive results so far.
Yeah, and Christian Wilkins missed another practice today. It doesn't look like he's going to participate in the mini camp, even if they practice another day. And without Wilkins, Adam Butler is the lead defensive tackle. Could you kind of talk about Butler's role and how the defensive tackle rotation is looking right now without Wilkins?
Yeah, so Butler, is really taking over, kind of that three tech role, which he already, he spent a lot of time there last season, so that's not new for him. But he's really been the leader of that group, and he had a pretty productive season last season. I would say, he had 5 sacks. He's had 5 sacks in each of the last 2 seasons for the Raiders, and he signed him to a 3-year, $16.5 million deal, which is a pretty nice financial commitment for a guy that's kind of bounced around throughout his career, but. He kind of used the next man up cliche when he talked today about, how they're trying to, replace Wilkins. It's still not really clear, like, when Wilkins is going to be back from that foot injury. Obviously, he's had some complications, but puts a lot more pressure on him. I think, he's a guy that, he's mostly been best as a situational pass rusher throughout his career, and now he's going to have to be more of like an impactful, like every down player and take on a bigger role in the run game as well. If Wilkins does ultimately, missing time and in Wilkins' place, kind of filling in that one tech role, or really John Jenkins' role last year, that nose tackle role has been Lecky Fotu, who has bounced around a little bit, but he's mostly been taking most of the nose tackle snaps, and then they've also been using a lot of 5-man fronts in practice. I think that's partly because of the nickelback situation. They've kind of decided to have 5 defensive linemen on the field more often than 5 defensive backs sometimes. And when they do that, it's been Zach Carter off the bench so far. And so I'm sure they would like to see, the rookies that they drafted, Tonkin Hemingway and JJ Pegues, get into the mix throughout training camp. We'll see if they're able to get into the mix for one of those defensive tackle roles so far. But so far, those 3 veterans have been leading the way, I would say, for the most part. And not the best group on paper. I think that obviously is a big downgrade, and you don't have Wilkins out there, and it just speaks to how pivotal it is that he's able to get healthy and rolling by the start of the season.
Yeah, I mean, with the depth at that position, you really need one of those young guys, whether it's Hemingway or JJ, to step up and become a strong part of the rotation. And another player that can help alleviate some of what Wilkins provides is Tyree Wilson. Even though he plays defensive end, he usually kicks inside on passing downs and rushes from the inside. He spoke today, and he said he's working on his footwork, his balance. He's adding to his overall pass rushing arsenal. I have high hopes for him. I thought he really showed some improvement down the stretch last season, and we'll see if he can continue that coming into his 3rd season when yeah, you usually see a breakout from some of these defensive ends.
Yeah, it seems like he's matured mentally. I think you can kind of just tell that from, even just these interview sessions. But he said he's just tried to get in better shape this year. I know people talked about, how muscular he was last season. It sounds like he probably got a little too big, as he was trying to expand his game to work more inside as a defensive tackle, which he did pretty often, I would say, on 3rd downs and more obvious passing downs to give him more of a pass rush boost. But they worked on his conditioning, his footwork, trying to expand his arsenal and not just be a guy that can only win with power. And so I think he's saying all the right things. I think we'll see, once the games roll around, if he's able to translate that to the field. But pretty big year for him. Obviously as a 1st-round pick, after this season, they're going to have to make a decision on whether or not they pick up his 5th-year option. Like, I think he'd have to have a pretty excellent season for them to do that at this point. So we'll see if he has that in his bag. But, he's sort of competing for that 3rd defensive end role. Like, Malcolm Fusi's still working his way back from the ACL injury last year, but if healthy, like, he's going to be a starter next to Crosby, and is going to be between Charles Snowden and Tyree Wilson, who's that 1st defensive end off the bench. And, ideally it'll be Wilson. I think, you like his versatility, his ability to kick inside. And, I think he has a more impressive physical skill set than Snowden does. And so the upside is higher. And so just a matter of he's able to, put all those things that he's learned over the course of the last few seasons and translate it to the field. He said he feels like he kind of had his feet under him for the first time in his career. Like, obviously that rookie season was sort of derailed by the foot injury that he had in college. And then last season, he still kind of felt like a deer in the headlights a little bit. It seems like now he's starting to get comfortable. So, I know fans of, he's probably never going to live up to that draft status, right? Being a number 7 overall pick in the draft. But if he can be a useful player for them, I think that's really just the goal at this point.
Yeah, I don't know if he'll ever be a consistent 10 sack guy, but I mean, that physical ability definitely pops off the film. Like you see that length and power and just raw speed come through when he plays. So that translates. It's just about doing the easy things like hand placement, get off. Like if he can do those things consistently, he's going to be a pretty hard player to deal with. And if he actually cleans up some of his moves and adds to his arsenal, that's going to be a guy that could get 8 to 10 sacks a season. So, I mean, the important thing is you see that physical ability translate. It's just a matter of honing in on those techniques and getting those skills cleaned up. All right, with the Germaine Pratt signing, the Raiders do address a major need on the roster. Are there any other major needs the Raiders can address with free agency or player or the trading block?
Yeah, I think the two big ones, are nickelback. I don't even say I'll say nickelback is a major need. I think that is 100% true. I say receiver is more of a question mark. Like if Dante Thornton doesn't continue this in training camp, if Jack Besh doesn't sort of figure things out, then I think it probably makes sense to add another veteran receiver. I feel more optimistic about them finding an answer at receiver with the guys that they already have on the roster. But if they do end up, looking outside, there's a couple guys still out there that are names that have been productive in the past, like a Keenan Allen or, fan favorite Amari Cooper still out there. So if they get desperate in training camp, there should still be guys in free agency at receiver. But I think nickelback is probably the position where I'd have more urgency at, just because I just don't really think they have a great answer on the roster. Holmes, like I think he's probably be one of the worst nickelbacks in the league. Like I think he's a guy to, he's a smart player, but he's just sort of limited by his lack of size and hasn't been consistent enough just to rely on that role full time. And I think that's why you see Chin playing so much nickelback and slide defender in his defense. And there's a lot to put on Chin's shoulders. And I think, kind of limits how much you can use him as a box safety or as a deep safety if you have to keep using him as a slot defender. And so guys like, Mike Hilton and others are still out there that can play nickelback. I know a lot of people have been asking about Jair Alexander with him getting cut by the Green Bay Packers. He's really best outside. I'm sure he could play nickel if he wanted to. Jalen Ramsey, he's a big name to talk out there, but I think the money that he's making makes that pretty hard to see the Raiders slinging a trade for him at this point. So there's some names out there that are intriguing at cornerbacks. I think that's probably the position group that you look at where, maybe they can feel good about the outside guys, two guys emerging between, Jakorian Bennett, Eric Stokes, and then Darien Porter. But nickelback, it's like, I don't really see it, so I think that could be a spot where it makes sense. And even after adding Pratt, they should have about $27 million in cap space remaining.
Yeah, I mean, the money is difficult, but that's why Jalen Ramsey just makes so much sense for this team. He could play nickel. He could play outside if you need him to. I think he could probably transition to play safety as he gets older. But I wonder if the Rams will pay part of his contract or if would be willing. Was that?
I mean the Dolphins.
Yeah, the Dolphins would be willing to pay part of his contract. Sean McVay did speak out and said he doesn't see them doing the Ramsey deal, by the way, and that's like one of his top suitors. So I wonder if places start running out, will he be willing to rework a deal because he's not at Dolphins practice right now. He clearly wants to get out of there. So, I mean, it just makes a ton of sense for this team. I think that obviously wants to win now. All right, let's get into fan questions. Is the expectation to roll over cap to next year, or do they plan on spending the remaining space? Any rumors of Jalen Ramsey or Jair to bolster the defensive back room by 3J season? We just kind of addressed the defensive back part of this question, but what do you think about the cap space they have, and do you think you're just going to roll it over?
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, they already have a shit ton of cap space next year. The cap number hasn't been set for next year, but they're going to have over $100 million in space in all likelihood. And so I don't think, it's something where they need to stash that space, but I wouldn't be surprised if they rolled over a nice little chunk of it. They're not going to spend money just to spend money. I think that's, you can just look at their moves in free agency and even, in these later stages of free agency to see that. And so I think they'd like to keep that financial flexibility. I wouldn't be surprised if they keep it going into the season. Like you always want to, keep yourself nimble just in case, injuries happen. Like guys go down that you didn't expect, and maybe you have to try to swing a trade or make a late signing that you didn't think you would have to do. And so I don't think it's not a bad thing to have some extra space. I think it was kind of perplexing a little bit to fans, just given that they did have some of those major holes still on the roster, and there are players of note that were out there. Why aren't they using it to go get this guy or go get that guy? But I think them signing Pratt today shows that they're still combing through that market, and they'll make moves when it makes sense for them.
That's why they have space for Ramsey. Just do it. Next question: How do folks look in Chip Kelly's system? Anything interesting in how he's using skill players? Though it might be hard to tell right now. From Hey Duke Lives 23.
Yeah, it's really not too much going on right now. Like they're keeping it pretty vanilla at this point in the calendar, and I know there's always going to be reports coming out of OTAs like, oh, it looks so different and stuff like that. Like that's going to happen every year, but like there's really nothing super notable about it. Compared to what they were doing last year. I think the biggest difference is that you can tell the talent was better at certain spots, particularly quarterback. Like Geno Smith is just such a massive upgrade over what they've had at quarterback the last few years, just in terms of his accuracy. And, I think they're, obviously last year they had Devontae Adams, so I wouldn't say the receiver room got better, but compared to where that room was at the end of last season, after he left, I think it's gotten better. And so the talent has been upgraded is what I would say. The players seem to be comfortable in the system and they like it, but they aren't doing a bunch of crazy shit out there yet in OTAs. Like that won't really happen till we get deeper into training camp. So nothing too, like we talked about the last episode, like every coordinator nowadays can say, oh, just run our system, we cater to our talent and all that kind of stuff. So they're all going to say that. So I think it's going to be easier to evaluate once we get into training camp and once the preseason gets rolling.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that Thornton and Tucker are starting outside now. The emphasis is obviously to get speed on the outside, open up space for Myers and Bowers underneath. I think it's interesting that Jeanty is running so many routes in the clips that I've seen, and they're not just like little choice routes. Like they're getting him downfield on double moves and things like that. So I think, and Jeanty did play receiver at one point when in the lower levels, so he does have those skills. So I think it's a good sign that they are planning to get Jeanty the ball downfield. But it's one thing to practice it, and we'll see if he does keep that philosophy once the bullets are flying. But I think if you're picking up back 6 overall, you're going to want to use him in a passing game, and I think it's a good sign that the routes I see him running in training camp are not just simple running back routes. They're trying to give him the ball.
Yeah, I think that Jeanty's sophomore year is probably a better, at Boise State is probably a better expectation to have about how the Raiders will use him than that junior year where they just, gave him 400 carries. Like I don't see that happening. I think they like that more healthy mix of. He's still going to have a lot of carries. Don't get it wrong, but they think he's a skilled receiver. He's really good with the ball in his hands, and there's other way to get him the ball besides just handing it off. And I think that's we'll see how this offensive line shakes out, especially if they aren't the best at run blocking. Like that doesn't mean you just don't use Ashton Jeanty. That just means you have to get creative in the ways that you use them. And so I think that could be something that we see once the season rolls around for sure.
Yep. And the questions that we've had are about Germaine Pratt and things we've already addressed. So that's all we have for you guys today. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
All right, y'all. Peace.
All right. To get more background and information on the Christian Wilkins injury, I want to welcome in Deepak Chona, who is a trained sports surgeon. He's been featured on ESPN, NBC, The Athletic, where me and Tashan work. And what I appreciate about his work is he's not trying to get a super specific diagnosis on things and guess when he hasn't seen the patient. He gives data-driven analysis based on previous history with certain injuries and predicts when a player is going to come back and how effective that player is going to be when he comes back. So how you doing, Deepak?
I'm good. Thanks for the intro and excited to join you here today.
Yeah, so Christian Wilkins is going to be one of the Raiders' key players coming into next season. They don't have a lot of defensive tackle depth. They're really depending on this defensive line to dominate because of all the question marks and the second and third levels of the defense. But he was injured last season, and most people expected him to be back at this point already, but he's had a setback with his foot. They put him back on a boot. He's off the boot, but he hasn't participated in OTAs or mini camp. Could you give us a little background about the injury and what might that setback be and what might his outlook be?
Yeah, so they diagnosed him with a Jones fracture, or at least that's what's reported. And when that happens, it's basically a break in the toe. But the important thing is the the spot where the bone breaks has a little bit of a dicey blood supply. So what they did is most likely put a screw through the bone to basically compress it together and get it to heal. When that heals and when it goes smoothly, it's often no problem, and the refracture rates, re-injury rates down the road are actually very low. You may remember Derrick Henry several years ago had this happen. You haven't heard about it since, and that's kind of the most common route that we see in the data. Now, the one hiccup here is that there is a rate, and it's about 20% or so of players having issues with this healing in the first place, and that's even despite the surgery going well. So what I suspect, or at least my concern level is somewhat raised for, given that he was off of the boot and then he went back on it, was that maybe as they advanced him, he was having some sort of symptoms, and as a result, they sort of re-imaged or further imaged, and it suggests that maybe it didn't heal all the way around. If you think about the bone as a cylinder, if it heals all the way around, that's going to be 100%, but we kind of grade it in terms of like percentage of how much of it did unite. And the suspicion or the concern is, did a lower percentage of it actually really form bone there? Now, in terms of the data, if he comes back and he's healed, the refracture rates, as I mentioned, are quite low. So most players, once they come back, they're pretty much able to stay back. The problem is just getting them back from the injury in the first place. So that's, from what we're hearing, it sounds like they expect him to be ready for training camp. But obviously, you know, the reports at this time of year are often optimistic. So it's a little bit hard to judge that at face value.
Yes. So the best case scenario would be him being back by training camp, and he would have a little chance to gear up for the season. Is there a more maybe realistic timeline for things? And what's the worst case scenario for this sort of recovery timeline that he's been on?
Yeah. So starting with the worst case scenario there, the worst case is that this bone's just not healing. And in that case, then it sometimes requires a revision surgery. Now, if he were undergoing that sort of thing, I would think that he would have had it already. So I don't say any of that to scare Raiders fans, just to kind of point out that that is in theory a possibility. More likely, I think he probably is, since he is now off the boot. It suggests that he's trending in the right direction. And therefore, I would suspect that as he probably continues to do that, you get progressively more healing of that foot, of that bone, and his foot can kind of regain some of the strength around it in the muscles. Because when you're not sort of training at an NFL level, you do lose some of that. Now, the performance data when he comes back usually actually would be pretty good, especially given that the season's still 3 months out. So if he's out there in training camp and kind of doing what would be normally expected for his position, I actually wouldn't really have concerns that he would have a lingering performance impact with this. He's had enough time removed from the injury and surgery itself that one would think he'd be pretty much ready to go.
Yeah, and it's the fact that he is a heavier player. Like Derrick Henry is a pretty heavy running back, but Christian Wilkins is a defensive tackle, a different body type. Does that add any risk or add a different factor to his performance coming off his injury?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And my suspicion is probably yes, in the sense that he's just seeing higher lows than, for example, you or I would on this injury. Now, with that being said, there's not a clear relation of weight, at least as far as I'm aware, that ties to a risk of re-injury. We often see these in defensive linemen, and as a result, you know, there's not really much to suss out there because most of them still heal just fine. Now, the one component of it is some players have kind of an increased arch to their foot, and that can be a predisposing factor that could lead to the injury in the first place. And most importantly, when they come back, that can kind of continue to be a little bit of an increased load that they're seeing. And then furthermore, on the other side, it can make them a little bit at risk as well. So that risk, I would say, just by the fact that he's had this injury happen, we have to say is a little bit bumped up compared to a player who has never had it. But with that being said, most of these players, when they come back, aren't really seeing consistent performance lags. So I would tell you, if he's back on the field by training camp, I would have very good optimism for him.
Awesome. Yeah, there's been so much mystery, and there just has not been a lot of information out about this injury and what's happening. And Raider fans are always ready for the worst case scenario, based on what's happened in the last 20 years. So, yeah, thank you so much for the information. Thank you for the awesome background on everything. Make sure you guys follow Deepak at Sports MD Analysis on X. Are you on Blue Sky or any other places where people find your work?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm on Instagram, Blue Sky, YouTube, and then we have a website, sportsmedanalytics.com, which is probably the easiest place to just find and sort through all your injury updates, whether it's for your favorite team or your fantasy players of interest. So you can pretty much holler at us on any platform, and we'll be happy to kind of talk ball anytime.
Yeah, awesome. Give them a follow, especially if you guys play fantasy football and you guys need all that information directly. All right. Thank you so much. And hopefully talk to you soon.
Absolutely.